The morning sun cast long shadows across the dig site as Dr. Elena Vasquez wiped sweat from her forehead. She had been working in the desert for 3 months now, but the strange crystal structures still made her heart race every time she looked. At them, the ruins were massive, bigger than any building humans had ever made. They stretched up toward the sky like frozen lightning, their surfaces shining with colors that had no names. Elena's team had found the first crystal spire by accident. A satellite had spotted something unusual in what used to be the Sahara Desert. When the first scientists arrived, they thought it might be some kind of natural formation. But the more they studied it, the more impossible it seemed. The crystals were perfectly straight, arranged in patterns that looked almost like writing. And they were old, very old. "Dr. Vasquez," called Marcus, one of her assistants. He was standing near the largest crystal tower, holding his scanner and shaking hands. "You need to see this." Elena walked over, her boots crunching on the sand. The scanner in Marcus's hands was going crazy. Numbers were flashing across the screen. So fast she could barely read them. The energy readings were off the charts. "That's impossible," Elena said, taking the scanner. "Nothing should be putting out this much power. These crystals have been here for thousands of years." "That's not the weird part," Marcus said. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "Look at the pattern." Elena looked where he was pointing. The energy readings weren't random. They were following a rhythm, like a heartbeat. Like the crystals were alive. For weeks, Elena's team had been trying to find a way inside the crystal structures. The walls looked smooth, with no doors or windows. But the energy readings suggested there was something important hidden inside. Something that had been waiting for a very long time. It was Dr. Sarah Chun who finally figured it out. She was the team's expert on ancient languages, and she had been studying the patterns on the crystal surfaces. Late one evening she came, running to Elena's tent, her eyes bright with excitement. "It's not just decoration," Sarah said, spreading her notes across Elena's desk. "These patterns, they're instructions, like a manual." Elena studied the drawings Sarah had made. The patterns did look like some kind of writing, but unlike anything humans had ever created. The symbols seemed to shift and change when she looked at them for too long. "Instructions for what?" Elena asked. "How to get inside," Sarah said. "But Elena, that's not the strangest part. Some of these symbols, they match human DNA patterns. Not exactly, but close enough that it can't be a coincidence." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. "What are you saying?" "I think whoever built these things knew about humans. Maybe they knew about humans before humans even existed." The next morning, Elena and her team stood before the largest crystal tower. Following Sarah's translation of the symbols, they had arranged themselves in a specific pattern around the base. Elena placed her hand on a smooth section of crystal that seemed to pulse with warm light. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the crystal began to glow brighter. The tower hummed with power, and a section of the wall simply vanished, revealing a doorway filled with soft blue light. Elena took a deep breath and stepped inside. The space beyond the doorway was huge. The walls curved up and away, disappearing into darkness above. But it was the light that took Elena's breath away. The entire chamber was filled with floating points of light, like stars hanging in the air. As she walked forward, the lights began to move, forming patterns and shapes around her. "My God," whispered Marcus, who had followed her inside. "It's beautiful." Elena's instruments were going crazy again, but she barely noticed. The floating lights were forming pictures now. Images of space, of planets, of creatures that looked almost human, but not quite. And then she saw something that made her heart stop. The lights showed Earth. Not the Earth she knew, but Earth from long ago. Primitive humans were there, living in caves, using simple tools. But watching them from the shadows were tall figures, with elongated limbs and faces that seemed to glow with inner light. The figures were helping the humans, teaching them, guiding them. "They were here," Elena said, her voice barely a whisper. "They were on Earth. They were with us." The light show continued, telling a story that lasted for what felt like hours. The tall figures, who Elena started thinking of as the architects, had visited many worlds. They had found young species and helped them grow. They had taken primitive creatures and made them smarter, stronger, better, but something had gone wrong. The lights showed the architects fleeing, running from something dark and terrible that Elena couldn't quite make out. They left behind their children, the species they had helped create. They left behind their technology, their knowledge, their hopes. And they left behind warnings. Elena watched as the light show reached its end. The last images showed the architects sealing away their greatest weapons and tools. They hid them in crystal structures like this one, scattered across many worlds. They left instructions for their children to find when the time came. When the children were ready to face what was coming, the lights faded, and Elena found herself standing in a chamber filled with real objects now. Machines that hummed with power, crystals that contained more information than all of Earth's computers combined. And in the center of it all, a device that looked almost like a throne, clearly meant for someone to sit in. Elena approached the throne carefully. As she got closer, symbols appeared in the air around it. More instructions, but these were different. These were meant for her, specifically for a human. The symbols showed how to connect with the device, how to access the knowledge stored within. Elena sat down. The moment she touched the armrests of the throne, the world exploded into knowledge. Information flooded her mind more than any human brain should have been able to handle. But somehow she understood it all, the history of the galaxy, the truth about humanity's origins, the terrible danger that was coming. The architects had been real. They had visited Earth millions of years ago and found early humans. They had carefully modified human DNA, making small changes that would only become apparent over time. They had made humans smarter, more adaptable, more stubborn. They had given humanity a gift that would not be understood for millions of years. They had made humans into warriors. Elena saw it all now. The galaxy was full of species that had been uplifted by the architects and others like them. Some had been made into builders, others into healers, others into thinkers. Each species had been given special gifts to prepare them for what was coming, but humanity had been made into something different. Humans had been designed to never give up, to keep fighting no matter how impossible the odds. They had been made to take broken things and fix them, to find hope in hopeless situations. The architects had known that someday something terrible would return to the galaxy, something that had driven them away once before. And when that day came, they wanted to make sure their children were ready. Elena gasped and pulled her hands away from the throne. The knowledge was still there in her mind, but the overwhelming flood had stopped. She looked around the chamber with new eyes, seeing the weapons and tools left behind by humanity's creators. "Dr. Vasquez," Marcus called from somewhere behind her. "Are you okay?" Elena turned to face her team. They were all staring at her with worried expressions. She realized that hours had passed while she sat in the throne. The sun was setting outside. "I'm fine," she said, though she wasn't sure. That was true. "But we need to contact Earth immediately. We need to tell them what we found." "What did you find?" Sarah asked. Elena looked back at the throne, at the machines humming with ancient power, at the weapons that could reshape reality itself. She thought about the knowledge now burning in her mind, about the terrible truth of what was coming. "We found out why we're here," she said, "and we found out what we need to do." Elena knew that everything was about to change. Humanity had spent thousands of years wondering if they were alone in the universe. Now they knew the truth. They were not alone, and they never had been. They were the children of legends, inheritors of a legacy written in starlight and hope, and somewhere out in the dark between the stars, their greatest test was waiting for them. 20 years had passed since Elena Vasquez first sat in the architect throne. The world had changed in ways no one could have imagined. Humanity had built their first starships using the crystal technology found in the ruins. They had reached for the stars with hungry hands, desperate to find answers to the questions that burned in their minds. Captain James Morrison stood on the bridge of the starship Discovery. watching the planet Kepler 442b grow larger on the main screen. The planet was beautiful, covered in blue oceans and green continents, but it was what the orbital scans had found that made his heart race with excitement. "Captain," said Lieutenant Sarah Kim, his science officer, "the structures on the surface are definitely artificial, and they're old, very old." James nodded. They had been searching for 20 years, visiting star system after star system. This was the 15th planet they had explored, and the first one that showed signs of the architects. Every other world had been empty, covered with the ruins of civilizations that had died out long ago. "Take us down," James ordered. "Land near the largest structure." The Discovery settled onto the planet's surface with a gentle thud. Through the windows, James could see crystal towers that looked almost exactly like the ones back on Earth, but these were different somehow. They seemed more complete, less damaged by time. The away team consisted of James, Sarah, and Dr. Michael Torres, who had studied the architect technology for most of his adult life. They walked across the alien grass toward the nearest crystal structure, their instruments beeping and clicking as they scanned everything around them. "The energy readings are incredible," Sarah said, checking her scanner. "These crystals are still active after all this time." Dr. Torres was practically bouncing with excitement. "Look at the patterns on the walls. They're similar to the ones on Earth, but much more complex. There's so much more information here." They found the entrance easily. Unlike the ruins on Earth, these crystals had obvious doorways marked with glowing symbols. James touched the symbols in the pattern Dr. Torres indicated, and the doorway opened with a soft chime. Inside, the chamber was filled with light. But this wasn't the gentle blue glow they had found on Earth. This light was warm and golden, and it seemed to welcome them. As they walked deeper into the structure, the walls began to show moving pictures, just like the ones Elena had seen years ago. But these pictures told a different story. James watched in amazement as the images showed not just Earth, but dozens of other worlds. The architects had been busy. They had visited planet after planet, finding young species and helping them grow. Each species was different, shaped by their world and their needs. On one planet covered in ice, the architects had helped a race of furry creatures develop technology that could survive in the cold. On another world with deadly storms, they had guided a species of flying beings to build cities in the clouds. Each time, the architects had been careful to help but not control. They had given their children the tools they needed, then stepped back to let them grow. "My God," whispered Sarah. "They were everywhere. They helped everyone." The pictures continued, showing more and more worlds, more and more species. James began to understand the scope of what the architects had done. They hadn't just uplifted humanity. They had uplifted hundreds of different species across the galaxy, but then the pictures changed, and James felt his blood run cold. The images showed something new. Dark shapes moving between the stars, creatures that seemed to bend reality around them. Wherever they went, entire star systems simply vanished. Not destroyed, not conquered, but erased, as if they had never existed at all. "What are those things?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking. Dr. Torres was studying the symbols that appeared alongside the images. His face had gone pale. "The architects called them the Devourers. They're not from our reality. They come from somewhere else, somewhere between dimensions." The pictures showed the Devourers spreading across the galaxy like a disease. One by one, the great civilizations fell. The architects and their allies fought back with weapons that could crack planets and reshape stars, but nothing could stop the Devourers. They consumed everything they touched, not just matter and energy, but existence itself. James watched as the story unfolded. The architects had been part of something called the Predecessor Alliance, a group of 12 ancient races that had guided younger species for millions of years. When the Devourers came, the predecessors had tried to stand against them. They had failed. The images showed the final battle. The last of the predecessor species, including the architects, had made a desperate last stand around a massive space station near the center of the galaxy. They had fought with everything they had, throwing their most powerful weapons at the Devourers. But it hadn't been enough. One by one, the predecessor species were wiped out. Not killed, but completely erased from existence, as if they had never been born. The architects were the last to fall, but before they died, they had done something incredible. They scattered their children, Dr. Torres said, reading the symbols. They sent all the species they had uplifted to the far edges of the galaxy. They hid them, gave them time to grow and develop. The pictures showed the architects' final act. With their last breath, they had seeded the galaxy with ruins and technology. They had left behind everything their children would need to eventually fight back. And they had included something else, something that made James's heart pound with excitement and terror, a warning. The Devourers would return. When? Sarah asked. When will they come back? The symbols were clear about that too. The Devourers followed a pattern, a cycle that repeated every few million years. They would consume everything they could find, then retreat to wherever they came from to digest what they had taken. Then they would return, hungry for more, and, according to the architect calculations, they were due to return soon. James felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. Humanity wasn't alone in the galaxy, but they weren't safe either. Somewhere out there, other species were growing and developing, just like humans. All of them were children of the predecessors, inheritors of a legacy they barely understood. We need to find the others, James said, the other species. We need to warn them. The pictures changed again, showing star maps and locations. The architects had been thorough. They had left detailed information about where their other children could be found. Some were close, only a few dozen light years away. Others were scattered across the galaxy, so far that it would take generations to reach them, but there was something else in the data, something that made James smile despite the terrible news about the Devourers. The architects had left behind more than just warnings and locations. They had left behind weapons and technology that the predecessors had been developing when the Devourers first came. Look at this, Dr. Torres said, pointing to a section of symbols. They were working on something called Project Renaissance, a way to fight the Devourers using the combined strengths of all their children. The images showed glimpses of incredible technology, ships that could exist in multiple dimensions at once, weapons that fired concentrated willpower and determination, shields powered by the collective hope of entire species. The predecessors had been preparing for the Devourers' return, even as they were being wiped out. James studied the star maps carefully. The nearest uplifted species was only 30 light-years away, in a system the architects called the Zephyr Reaches. The data suggested they were a species that could fly, adapted for life in the thick atmosphere of a gas giant's moon. Set course for the Zephyr Reaches, James ordered as they returned to the ship. Best possible speed. The journey took 3 weeks, even with the improved engines based on architect technology. When they arrived, they found a system with a massive gas giant surrounded by dozens of moons. Their sensors immediately detected artificial structures on the largest moon as well as ships moving between the moons. They're definitely advanced, Sarah reported. Their technology looks different from ours, but it's clearly based on the same architect principles. James opened a communication channel, not knowing if the aliens would understand human language. But the architects had been thorough in their planning. The crystal technology included translation programs that could handle any language developed by their children. "This is Captain James Morrison of the Earthship Discovery," he broadcast. "We are seeking our siblings among the stars." The response came quickly, in a voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Welcome, children of Earth, we have been waiting for you. We are the Zephyrians, and we too have found the warnings left by our makers." James felt relief wash over him. They weren't alone. The Zephyrians had found their own ruins, their own warnings about the Devourers. They had been preparing, just like humanity. Over the next few days, James learned about the Zephyrians and their culture. They were graceful beings with translucent wings and bodies that seemed to glow with inner light. They had built their civilization in the upper atmosphere of their gas giant, creating floating cities that danced on the winds. The Zephyrians had developed technology that was completely different from human designs, but equally advanced. Their ships were alive, grown rather than built, and they could move through space like fish swimming through water. 5 years had passed since first contact with the Zephyrians, and the galaxy was no longer a lonely place. The Great Assembly, as it came to be called, now included 12 different species, all children of the predecessors. They met on the ancient space station orbiting the ruins of what had once been the predecessor homeworld. Maria Santos stood in the massive assembly hall, looking up at the crystalline dome that showed the stars wheeling overhead. She was no longer the mining engineer she had been 10 years ago. Now she was Admiral Santos, commander of humanity's new fleet, and the woman who had figured out how to build ships that could fight the impossible. Around her, representatives from all 12 species worked together in ways that would have seemed like magic to earlier generations. The crystalline collective hummed and chimed as they shared thoughts through their hive mind network. The Ember clans glowed with inner fire as they shaped metal with their bare hands. The deep singers created music that could bend space itself, but it was the humans who had surprised everyone the most. "The energy patterns are still unstable," said Thoughtweaver Crix, the representative from the crystalline collective. Their voice sounded like wind chimes made of diamond. "Your ships should not be able to exist in normal space, yet they do." Maria smiled. She had heard this complaint dozens of times over the past few years. The other species built their ships using careful science and precise engineering. Humans built ships that ran on stubbornness and refused to follow the laws of physics when those laws were inconvenient. "That's the point," Maria said. "The Devourers exist outside normal reality. To fight them, we need ships that can do the same thing." She gestured toward the viewing window, where the first of humanity's new warships hung in space. The Undaunted looked like no ship that had ever been built. Its hull was made from a combination of architect crystal and human steel, but it was held together by something more than just materials. The ship existed because its crew believed it should exist. "Your people are insane," said Flimcaller Thrun from the Ember clans, but he said it with what sounded like admiration. "You take our most advanced technologies and use them in ways that should kill you all," Maria laughed. "We've been doing impossible things for thousands of years. The architects made us stubborn for a reason." The development of the legendary class ships had been humanity's greatest contribution to the Alliance. Other species had tried to build weapons that could hurt the Devourers by studying the ancient predecessor technology. They had created powerful energy cannons and reality-bending shields, all based on solid scientific principles. Humans had taken a different approach. Instead of trying to understand how the technology worked, they had asked a different question. What if the technology worked because they believed it should work? The idea had come from Dr. Elena Vasquez, who was now the head of humanity's research division. She had noticed that the architect ruins responded differently to humans than to other species. When humans touched the crystal controls, the technology seemed to become more flexible, more willing to bend the rules. "The architects designed us to be warriors," Elena had explained to the assembly, "but not just physical warriors. They made us into warriors against impossibility itself. They gave us the ability to make things work through pure determination." Maria remembered the first test flight of the Undaunted. The ship had been built using blueprints that made no sense to any engineer. The engines drew power from the crews. Collective will. The weapons fired concentrated hope and determination. The shields were made of crystallized stubbornness by all the laws of science. The ship should have fallen apart the moment they turned on the engines. Instead, it had flown better than any ship anyone had ever seen. The neural synchronization system is online, reported Commander David Park from the Undaunted's bridge. His voice came through the communication system with a slight echo, as if he was speaking from inside a cathedral. "All crew members are connected to the ship's consciousness," Maria nodded. "That was another thing that made the legendary ships unique," The crew didn't just operate the ship, they became part of it. Every human on board was linked through a modified version of architect neural technology. When they flew as one mind with one purpose. "Begin the demonstration," Maria ordered. On the viewing screen, the Undaunted began to glow. The crystal sections of its hull pulsed with warm light, and the space around the ship started to ripple like water. Then, impossibly, the ship simply stepped sideways through reality and vanished. The assembled aliens watched in stunned silence as their instruments went crazy. The Undaunted had moved into a dimension that shouldn't exist. A space between spaces where the normal rules didn't apply. "Phase shift complete," reported Commander Park. "We are now existing in parallel dimensional space. Reality feels flexible here." A moment later, the Undaunted reappeared, but not where it had vanished. It materialized on the other side of the space station, having crossed thousands of kilometers in the blink of an eye. "Incredible," whispered Harmony Singer Lux from the Deep Singers. "You move through the same spaces the Devourers use. How is this possible?" Maria looked around the assembly hall at the faces of their allies. Some showed amazement, others showed fear, all of them showed respect. "The architects left us more than just technology," Maria explained. "They left us the ability to refuse to accept limitations. When the universe tells us something is impossible, we tell it to try harder." Over the following months, humanity worked with their allies to build more legendary ships. Each one was unique, shaped by the personalities and determination of its crew. The Indomitable was crewed by former soldiers who had never known defeat. The Relentless was commanded by explorers who had spent their lives pushing into unknown territories. The Phoenix Rising was operated by people who had lost everything and built their lives back from nothing. Each ship had its own personality, its own way of bending reality. The Indomitable could exist in 17 dimensions at once. The Relentless could chase enemies through time itself. The Phoenix Rising could rebuild itself from complete destruction as long as one crew member still believed in victory, but building the ships was only part of the preparation. The Alliance also had to learn how to fight together. "The Devourers do not fight like normal enemies," explained Archive Keeper Zelp from the Ancient Ones, a species that looked like Livingstone. "They do not destroy, they erase. When they consume something, it ceases to have ever existed." Maria studied the holographic displays that showed what little information they had about Devourer tactics. The creatures seemed to exist partially outside normal space-time, which made them almost impossible to target with conventional weapons. "That's why we need the synchronization networks," Maria said. "If we can link all our ships and crews together, we can fight them on multiple levels of reality at once." The plan was ambitious beyond anything that had ever been attempted. 12 different species, each with their own technology and fighting styles, would link their consciousness together through a modified version of humanity's neural networks. The Crystalline Collective would provide the base framework, their hive mind experience essential for managing the mental load. The Deep Singers would create harmonic resonance patterns to keep everyone synchronized. The Ember clans would provide the raw willpower needed to maintain the connection across space, and humans would serve as the core, the stubborn heart that refused to let the network fail. "You understand that this has never been tested on this scale," warned Thoughtweaver Crix. "If something goes wrong, we could lose our individual identities entirely." Maria looked out at the growing fleet. Human legendary ships flew alongside. Zephyrian biovessels and crystalline geometric craft. Ember clan fireships danced with Deep Singer acoustic vessels. Each species brought their own strengths to the Alliance. The predecessors tried to fight the Devourers using conventional tactics, Maria said. They failed because they fought as separate species, each using their own methods. We're going to try something different. "What if it doesn't work?" asked Flimcaller Thrun. Maria smiled, and for a moment her expression reminded everyone in the room exactly why the architects had chosen humans to be their warriors. "Then we'll try something else. And if that doesn't work, we'll try again. We'll keep trying until we find something that does work, or until there's nothing left to try with." The first full-scale test of the synchronization network took place. 3 weeks later, every ship in the Alliance fleet linked together, creating a single massive mind made up of thousands of individual consciousness. For one brief, shining moment, Maria felt what it was like to think with the collective intelligence of 12 species. She felt the mathematical precision of the crystalline collective, the wild creativity of the Zephyrians, the controlled fury of the Ember clans. She felt the deep patience of the Ancient Ones and the musical harmony of the Deep Singers. And through it all, she felt the impossible, stubborn determination of humanity, holding the entire network together through pure refusal to give up. The test lasted only a few minutes, but it was enough. They could do this. They could fight as one people instead of 12 separate species. The warning came at 0347 hours, ship time. Captain Elena Vasquez was sleeping when the alarms started screaming throughout the Undaunted. She had been dreaming of the first crystal ruins in the desert, the place where everything had started 40 years ago. Now she was 62 years old, gray-haired and lined with age, but her eyes still burned with the same determination that had carried her into those ancient halls. "Captain, to the bridge," came the urgent voice of Lieutenant Commander Sarah. "Chun, her first officer, we have contact." Elena ran through the corridors of her ship, past crew members rushing to their stations. The Undaunted hummed around her, its crystal and metal hull pulsing with energy. After 5 years of flying these impossible ships, Elena had learned to feel the vessel's moods. Right now, the ship felt alert and eager, like a hunting dog that had caught a scent. The bridge was a storm of activity when she arrived. The main view screen showed the Kepler sector, where the Alliance fleet had taken position around the ancient predecessor beacon station. 12 different species had gathered their best ships here, ready to make their stand against the darkness. "Report," Elena ordered, settling into her command chair. "Long-range sensors are picking up dimensional distortions," Sarah said, her voice tight with stress. "Something big is coming through the void between realities." Elena looked at the sensor readings and felt her blood run cold. The numbers were impossible. Whatever was approaching was larger than anything they had prepared for. The distortions were tearing holes in space itself, creating wounds in reality that bled strange energies into normal space. "How long until they arrive?" Elena asked. 47 minutes, reported the sensor officer. "Captain, the distortion field is growing. I'm reading 17 separate contact points. No, wait, 23. The numbers keep changing." Elena opened a communication channel to the rest of the fleet. "All ships, this is Captain Vasquez. The enemy is approaching. All crews to battle stations. Initiate synchronization protocol. Around the beacon station, 200 ships from 12 different species began to move into formation. The sight would have been beautiful if the situation weren't so desperate. Zephyrian bioships flowed like living things through space. Crystalline geometric vessels shifted and reconfigured themselves. Ember clan fireships glowed like small suns, but it was the human ships that drew the most attention. 23 legendary class vessels hung in space like frozen lightning, their hulls crackling with impossible energies. Each one was unique, shaped by the will and determination of its crew. The Undaunted led them, followed by the Indomitable, the Relentless, the Phoenix, Rising, and 19 others. "Synchronization network is online," reported the communications officer. "All ships are connected." Elena felt the moment when her mind joined with the network. Suddenly, she wasn't just Captain Elena Vasquez anymore. She was part of something larger, a collective consciousness made up of thousands of individuals from 12 different species. She could feel Admiral Maria Santos coordinating the overall battle plan from the command station. She could sense the mathematical precision of the crystalline collective calculating firing solutions. She could hear the deep singers preparing their reality-bending music, but she was still herself, still human, still stubborn enough to fight the impossible. "Enemy contacts are materializing," announced the sensor officer, his voice echoing strangely. Through the network connection, the first devourer appeared on the edge of the sensor grid like a nightmare made real. It was huge, easily the size of a small moon, but its shape made no sense to human eyes. The creature existed in multiple dimensions at once, appearing as a constantly shifting mass of angles and curves that hurt to look at directly. "My God," whispered someone over the network. "It's beautiful." Elena had to agree, even as her mind recoiled from what she was seeing. The devourer was terrible and magnificent at the same time, like looking at the birth of a star or the death of a galaxy. Its surface rippled with colors that had no names, and space itself seemed to bend around it. Then more devourers began to appear. They materialized out of the void between dimensions like bubbles rising to the surface of a dark ocean. Each one was different, shaped by hungers and needs that no normal mind could understand. "Fleet Formation Delta 7, Admiral Santos ordered. Through the network. All ships, remember your training? We are not fighting these things to destroy them. We are fighting to prove that reality belongs to us." The Alliance fleet moved into attack formation. The plan they had developed was complex, requiring perfect coordination between species that thought in completely different ways. The Crystalline Collective would provide targeting data through their hive mind calculations. The Deep Singers would create harmonic frequencies to disrupt the Devourer's dimensional stability. The Ember Clans would provide raw firepower through their stellar-forged weapons, and the humans would do what humans did best. They would refuse to give up. "First wave, prepare to engage," Elena ordered. The Undaunted and 5 other legendary ships broke formation and accelerated toward the nearest devourer. The creature noticed them coming and turned in their direction. Elena got her first close look at something that had erased entire civilizations from existence. The devourer's surface was covered in what looked like mouths, each one large enough to swallow a battleship. But these weren't mouths that ate matter or energy. These were openings that consumed existence itself. "All ships, initiate phase shift," Elena commanded. The 6 human ships simply stepped sideways through reality. One moment they were flying through normal space, the next they were existing in the same dimensional void where the devourers lived. The transition felt like falling through ice-cold water made of liquid starlight. "We're in their space now," reported the navigation officer. "Reality feels hungry here." Elena could feel it too. This dimension was wrong in ways that made her soul ache. It was a place where thoughts became things and things dissolved back into thoughts. The devourers belonged here, but humans definitely did not. "Fire," Elena ordered. The Undaunted's main guns opened up with a sound like reality tearing, but these weren't normal weapons. The energy beams that lanced out from the ship were made of crystallized determination, powered by the absolute refusal of the crew to accept defeat. The shots hit the Devourer's shifting surface and actually did damage, carving deep wounds in something that should have been untouchable. The creature screamed. The sound wasn't heard with the ears, but felt in the bones and the soul. It was the cry of something that had never been hurt before, something that had spent eons consuming without ever being consumed in return. "Target is wounded, but still functional," reported the tactical officer, switching to concentrated fire. The other legendary ships joined the attack. The Indomitable fired beams of pure stubbornness that forced the Devourer to exist in only 3 dimensions. The Relentless launched missiles made of compressed hope that exploded into flowers of light against the creature's hide. The Phoenix, rising, simply rammed straight through the Devourer's body, its hull ablaze with the determination to rise again from any destruction. But the Devourer was learning. It began to adapt to their attacks, its form shifting and changing to better resist their impossible weapons. Worse, the other Devourers were approaching, drawn by the sounds of battle. "All ships, fall back to formation," Admiral Santos ordered. "Prepare for full network synchronization." Elena felt the moment when every consciousness in the fleet joined together into a single massive mind. Suddenly, she wasn't just Elena Vasquez, she wasn't just human, she wasn't even just one species. She was part of something that included the mathematical beauty of the Crystalline Collective, the wild freedom of the Zephyrians, the controlled fury of the Ember Clans. She was part of all the children of the predecessors, united at last. The synchronized fleet attacked as one organism. Zephyrian bioships created living barriers that could exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Crystalline vessels calculated the exact frequency needed to disrupt the Devourer's dimensional anchors. Ember Clan fireships poured stellar energy into the void between worlds, and the human ships held it all together through pure, stubborn refusal to accept the impossible. "Target the reality anchor points," Elena heard herself say, though the voice came from all the human captains. Speaking in unison, "Force them into normal space where they can be hurt." The deep singers began their war song, a harmony that reached across dimensions and grabbed the Devourers by their very existence. The creatures tried to resist, but the song was too beautiful, too perfect. One by one, they were pulled from their native dimension into normal space-time. And in normal space, they could bleed. The first Devourer to be fully materialized let out another scream as the Alliance fleet poured everything they had into it. Energy weapons designed by a dozen different species, guided by calculations from the best minds in the galaxy, powered by the combined will of everyone who refused to let the darkness win. The creature began to dissolve, its impossible form coming apart like smoke in a strong wind. For the first time in millions of years, a Devourer died, but there were more of them. Many more. The final battle raged across 3 star systems and 17 dimensions. Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the Undaunted, her hands gripping the command chair as reality twisted around them. Through the neural network, she could feel every ship in the Alliance fleet, every mind fighting against the darkness that threatened to erase everything they had ever known. "Devourer fleet has reached critical mass," reported Admiral Santos through the network. 237. Entities confirmed. They're forming some kind of pattern. Elena looked at the tactical display and felt her heart sink. The Devourers weren't just attacking randomly anymore. They had learned from their losses and were now moving in perfect coordination. Worse, they were doing something that made the space around them ripple like water. "They're trying to create a reality storm," said Dr. Torres, his voice tight with fear. "If they succeed, they'll be able to erase this entire sector from existence." Through the synchronized consciousness of the fleet, Elena could feel the terror spreading. They had fought for 6 hours and managed to destroy 12 Devourers, but the enemy kept adapting. Each victory became harder than the last as the creatures learned new ways to resist their attacks. But Elena could also feel something else in the network. The same stubborn determination that had carried humanity from caves to stars was now shared by every species in the fleet. The Zephyrians refused to let their wind songs be silenced. The Ember clans would not let their fires be extinguished. The Deep Singers would not allow their harmonies to be broken. "All ships, new formation," Elena commanded, her voice carrying the authority of every captain in the human fleet. "We're going to try something the predecessors never attempted." "What do you have in mind?" asked Thoughtweaver Crix from the Crystalline Collective. Elena looked at the growing reality storm and smiled grimly. "We're going to become legends." The plan was insane, even by human standards. Instead of fighting the Devourers in normal space or their native dimension, Elena wanted to create a third option. Using the combined willpower of every consciousness. In the fleet, they would forge a new kind of space where the rules worked in their favor. "It's never been done before," warned Archive Keeper Zelt. "Creating a pocket dimension requires more energy than our ships can generate." "We're not going to use energy," Elena said. "We're going to use something better. We're going to use story." The idea had come from studying the ancient predecessor records. The original builders of the galaxy had understood something important about reality. At its deepest level, existence wasn't made of matter or energy. It was made of meaning, of narrative, of the stories that thinking beings told about their universe. The Devourers were creatures of unstory, beings that existed to erase meaning and leave only hungry emptiness behind. But the children of the predecessors were something different. They were inheritors of legends, keepers of tales that had been passed down through the ruins and crystal memories. "All ships, prepare for narrative synchronization," Elena ordered. "Remember who we are. Remember where we came from. Remember what we're fighting for. The neural network expanded, but this time it carried more than just thoughts and tactical data. It carried stories. The tale of humanity's first steps out of caves and into starlight. The song of the Zephyrians dancing on cosmic winds. The forge epics of the Ember clans shaping metal and stellar cores. Every species added their legends to the growing tapestry of meaning. The patient stone dreams of the ancient ones. The mathematical poetry of the crystalline collective. The deep potion sagas of the deep singer's Dodd, and at the center of it all, the simple human story of never giving up. Elena felt the moment when the pocket dimension began to form around the fleet. Space itself started to change, becoming less a void between objects and more a stage where stories could play out. The laws of physics became suggestions that could be overruled by sufficient narrative weight. "Dimensional pocket is stable," reported the science officer, wonder in his voice. "We've created a space where our stories are stronger than their hunger." The Devourers noticed the change immediately. They pressed against the boundaries of the pocket dimension, trying to tear it apart with their reality-warping abilities. But every time they attacked, the stories grew stronger. Every assault only proved that the children of the predecessors were worth the effort of trying to erase. They can't enter, Elena realized. They can't exist in a space made of pure story. They're too empty, too meaningless. But the Devourers weren't giving up. If they couldn't enter the pocket dimension, they would collapse it from the outside. The reality storm they had been building began to focus on the barriers between normal space and the story realm. "Dimensional integrity failing," warned the engineering teams across the fleet. "We can't maintain this for long." Elena looked around the bridge at her crew. These were people who had spent their lives refusing to accept impossible odds. They had taken alien technology and made it work through pure stubbornness. They had built ships that existed because their crews believed they should exist. "Then, we don't maintain it," Elena said. "We do what humans have always done. We use it up, burn it out, and make it count." The plan that formed in the collective consciousness of the fleet was magnificent and terrible. Instead of trying to preserve their pocket dimension, they would use it as a weapon. They would collapse it deliberately, but collapse it inward, taking as many Devourers with them as possible. "All ships, prepare for dimensional implosion," Admiral Santos announced. "This is going to hurt." Elena felt the network adjusting as every consciousness in the fleet prepared for what might be their final act. The Zephyrians sang farewell songs to the wind. The Ember clans forged their last and greatest weapons. The deep singers harmonized with the music of dying stars. And the humans did what they had always done. They got ready to take as many enemies with them as possible. "Implosion initiated," reported the Fleet Science Division. Dimensional boundaries collapsing in 3, 2, 1. The pocket dimension collapsed like a soap bubble made of crystallized story, but as it fell inward, it grabbed everything it could reach. Dozens of Devourers were caught in the implosion, dragged from their native void into a space that was too full of meaning for them to survive. Elena watched through the network as the creatures of emptiness met the concentrated essence of every legend the Alliance had ever known. They simply couldn't exist in the same space. One by one, they dissolved like shadows before a bonfire. When the implosion finished, nearly half the Devourer fleet was gone, but the Alliance fleet was scattered and damaged. Many ships had been destroyed in the dimensional collapse. Others were drifting in space, their crews unconscious from the strain of the network connection. "Status report," Elena called weakly. The neural link was fading as exhausted minds dropped out of the network. 63 ships still operational," came the reply from Admiral Santos. "But the remaining Devourers are regrouping. They're adapting." "To what we just did?" Elena looked at the tactical display and saw that Santos was right. The surviving Devourers were changing again, becoming something that could resist story-based attacks. They were learning to wrap themselves in meaninglessness so thick that narrative couldn't touch them. "They're going to try the reality storm again," Elena said. "And this time we don't have enough ships to stop them." That was when she felt it. A new presence in the fading neural network, something vast and ancient and familiar. "Do you feel that?" asked Dr. Torres. Elena nodded. Through the quantum foam of damaged space-time, she could sense other minds joining the network. Minds that had been silent for millions of years? "Impossible," whispered Archive Keeper Zelt. "Those are predecessor consciousness patterns, but they were all erased." "No," Elena said, understanding flooding through her. "They were hidden." Hidden. In the stories we just told. Every time we remembered them, every time we honored their legacy, a piece of them survived. The predecessors had not truly died. They had transformed themselves into something the Devourers couldn't touch. They had become legends, stories that lived on in the minds and hearts of their children. And now, when those children needed them most, they were returning. Elena felt the network expanding again. But this time it included consciousness patterns from 12 ancient species. The architects were there, along with their 11 allies. They had been waiting in the stories all along, waiting for their children to grow strong enough to call them back. "All ships," Elena said, her voice now carrying the authority of legends themselves, "prepare for the final assault." "We're not just the children of the predecessors anymore. We are their inheritors, their continuation, their revenge against the darkness." The combined fleet of the living and the legendary charged the remaining Devourers. Ships that ran on story logic flew alongside vessels crewed by beings of pure narrative. Weapons that fired crystallized hope struck targets alongside guns that shot concentrated memory. The Devourers tried to adapt, tried to learn, tried to become something that could resist the assault. But they couldn't adapt to this. They couldn't learn to resist the combined will of the living and the dead, the real and the legendary. The children and their parents united at last. One by one, the creatures of emptiness were filled with meaning until,